Hi everyone, welcome to Lesson 6, Week 7 for Reading Comprehension. The 6, which is Kenji. Chapter 6, Kenji. Everyone saved paper for Sadako's good luck cranes. Chizuko brought coloured paper from the bamboo class. Father saved every scrap from the barber shop. Even Nurse Yasunaga gave Sadako the wrappings from packings of medicine, and Masahiro hung every one of the birds as he had promised. Sometimes he strung many on one thread. The biggest cranes flew alone. During the next few months, there were times when Sadako felt almost well. However, Dr. Numata said it was best for her to stay in the hospital. By now, Sadako realized she had leukemia. But she also knew that some patients recovered from the disease. She never stopped hoping that she would get well. On good days, Sadako was busy. She did her homework, wrote letters to her friends and pen pals, and amused her visitors with games, riddles, and songs. In the evening, she always made paper cranes. Her flock grew to over 300. Now the birds were perfectly folded. Her fingers were sure and worked quickly without any mistakes. Gradually, the atom bomb disease took away Sadako's energy. She learned about pain. Sometimes throbbing headaches stopped her from reading and writing. At other times, her bones seemed to be on fire, and more dizzy spells sent Sadako into deep blackness. Often she was too weak to do anything but sit by the window and look longingly out at the maple tree in the courtyard. She would stay there for hours, holding the golden crane in her lap. Sadako was feeling especially tired one day when Nurse Yasunaga wheeled her out onto the front porch for some sunshine. There Sadako saw Kenji for the first time. He was 9 and small for his age. Sadako stared at his thin face and shining dark eyes. "Hello," she said. "I'm Sadako." Kenji answered in a low, soft voice. Soon the two were talking like old friends. Kenji had been in the hospital for a long time, but he had few visitors. His parents were dead, and he'd been living with an aunt in a nearby town. "She's so old that she comes to see me only once a week," Kenji said. "I read most of the time." Sadako turned away at the sad look on Kenji's face. "It doesn't really matter," he went on with a weary sigh, "because I'll die soon. I have leukemia from the bomb." "But you can't have leukemia," Sadako said quickly. "You weren't even born then." "That isn't important," Kenji said. "The poison was in my mother's body, and I got it from her." Sadako wanted so much to comfort him, but she didn't know what to say. Then she remembered the cranes. "You can make paper cranes like I do," she said, "so that a miracle can happen." "I know about the cranes," Kenji replied quickly, "but it's too late. Even the gods can't help me now." Just then, Nurse Yasunaga came out onto the porch. "Kenji," she said sternly, "how do you know such things?" He gave her a sharp look. "I just know," he said. "And besides, I can read my blood count on the chart. Every day it gets worse." The nurse was flustered. "What a talker," she said. "You are tiring yourself." And she wheeled Kenji inside. Back in her room, Sadako was thoughtful. She tried to imagine what it would be like to be ill and have no family. Kenji was brave, that's all. She made a big crane out of the prettiest paper and sent it across the hall to his room. Perhaps it would bring him good luck. Then she folded more birds for her flock. 398, 399. One day, Kenji didn't appear on the porch. Late that night, Sadako heard the rumble of a bed being rolled down the hall. Nurse Yasunaga came in to tell her that Kenji had died. Sadako turned to the wall and let the tears come. After a while, she felt the nurse's gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's sit by the window and talk," Nurse Yasunaga said in a kindly voice. When Sadako finally stopped sobbing, she looked out at the moonlit sky. Do you think Kenji is up there on a star island? Wherever he is, I'm sure that he's happy now, the nurse said. He has shed that tired, sick body and his spirit is free. Sadako was quiet, listening to the leaves on the maple tree rustle in the wind. Then she said, I'm going to die next, aren't I? Of course not, Nurse Yasunaga answered with a firm shake of her head. She spread some coloured paper on Sadako's bed. Come and let's see you fold another paper crane before you go to sleep. After you finish 1,000 birds, you'll live to be an old lady. An old lady. Sadako tried to believe that. She carefully folded cranes and made the same wish. 463. 464. Okay, so in this chapter we met this character called Kenji. He's another patient at the hospital that Sadako's at. He's a child, he's 9 years old, he's roughly the same age as Sadako, a bit younger, and he also has leukemia, which is the type of cancer that Sadako has. Now, both of them developed this cancer due to the radiation of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And in chapter 1, we're told that this particular event, the bomb being dropped on Hiroshima, happened on the 6th of August, 1945. And you can see here there's this really iconic photo. That means it's a very recognizable photo of what's called a mushroom cloud. So this is when an atomic device has been detonated. So it would have been detonated probably about here. And this is all the dust and smoke and ash and vapor that's lifted into the air. And it forms this kind of mushroom formation, which is associated with atomic weapons. Now, this was a really pivotal, a really important moment in history, particularly in the 20th century, which is the last century. It signified the end of World War II, essentially. So a lot of historians argue, and they still argue today, about whether dropping a bomb, a nuclear bomb, I should say, on a civilian city ended the war, sort of forced the Japanese to say, well, do you know what, we can't actually win this war because the Americans have these atomic weapons, which are highly destructive. That's still a debate that's going on today, but it was very close to when the Japanese surrendered. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of debate about whether this is an ethical thing to do, because considering this, most of these people in this city weren't in the military, they were just going about their normal lives, and they were killed or injured, or in the case of Sadako and Kenji, given this high dose of radiation, which made them very sick later on. They developed cancer and so on. Here we saw early in we're just looking at chapter 2, I think, or chapter 1, we saw this atomic dome, which is this really recognizable structure in Hiroshima, which survived the blast. But you can see how destructive the blast is. So it basically leveled the rest of the city. All the buildings were knocked down. And here, there's actually a map. So this is from Sydney Morning Herald, from an article quite a while ago, I think. Maybe it was around the 75th anniversary of this event. And it shows you just how destructive an atomic bomb of this type would be if it was dropped into the middle of Sydney. So here, this would the red bit would be the fireball radius and an air blast radius, then a radiation radius, and then there's like even more air blast. So it basically sort of spreads out like this, sort of spreading fire, and a really strong blast of air, of hot air, would go out. So it basically destroy the whole CBD straight away. It would just be completely leveled. So that's how destructive this weapon is. So atomic bombs or nuclear weapons are, at the moment, the most destructive weapons that humans have created. There's only been 2 instances where they've been used in wars, and that was here in Hiroshima and then also in Nagasaki. After that, because they're so destructive, there's a lot of laws and international laws around when people can use them, if they can use them at all. So it really is like this moment in history is it's big on a world kind of level. Like it really changed the course of history and the direction of the war. But it also had this effect on the people who lived there that um, have to call Hiroshima their home, like Sadako. So she doesn't really remember the war because she was too young, and Kenji was born after the war. But they're still having to live with the effects of war. They're still having to live with this radiation pollution that's made them incredibly sick. Okay, and here are your comprehension questions for today. Firstly, how were Kenji and Sadako alike and how were they different? So describe some of their similarities, some things they have in common, and then also their differences. Now, those differences might be personality differences. They might be also obvious differences. You know, Sadako's a girl, Kenji's a boy. But think about maybe their personality differences. That's probably more interesting than just stating, oh, well, his name's Kenji and her name's Sadako. How are they different in personality, in their outlook? Number two, give one example of a conflict that occurred during today's chapter. Now, a conflict, this is not really like a fight as such. It's more about where two things are in opposition against one another, or we've got two kind of forces going up against one another, particularly in a narrative sense. So this story is a narrative, it's a story, and sometimes there are conflicts in there or problems. Conflicts kind of like where a character and another character might be arguing, like so a person versus person, or a person and their self. So they might have self-doubt, or they might have something that's really bothering them. So they're kind of grappling with that. So a person, like a character versus themselves. It could be a person versus nature. So something that they either can't control, or something around them, something in their environment, or person versus society. So you've got an individual, and around them they've got a society that's telling them to do one thing and then they want to do another, so that's creating conflict. So here you just need to give an example of one type of conflict that occurred during today's chapter, and once you've identified that, whether it's person versus person, person versus self, versus nature, or versus society, make sure you're specific and explain how this is a conflict. So if you think there was a conflict between Kenji and Sadako, then that would be person versus person, but you need to explain, how is it a conflict? Question 3, how did making the cranes help Sadako and her family? So this is sort of an inferential question. We've got a few of these throughout this book. So think about, what it does for the family, what it does for Sadako. It doesn't actually specifically say it in the book, like it's not there in black and white, but you need to read that or listen to that part of the story again and see how do you think making the cranes helped Sadako and her family. And lastly, question 4, in that last slide, I was talking about all the history around Hiroshima and the atomic bomb, and there's quite a lot of information around that. And it can be quite confusing at times as well. So what I'd like you to do today, it only needs to be one sentence, is write down a good question. So it could be something you're confused about. For example, why was the atomic bomb dropped? Or it could be something you're curious about, like, where is Hiroshima located? Or what is it like today? Like, we've got this atomic bomb that was dropped 76 years ago. Is it safe to live there today? What's it like today? What are the people like? Or it could be a story question as well. So these ones here are all about the context, about the background of this story. Let me just do a quick circle around here. Or it could be a story question. So why did the author have Sadako love running? Or what character would you like to be if you were in this story? Now, remember, this story is written by this author, Eleanor Kaur. It's not a word-for-word account of Sadako's life. It's based on her true story, so she would know something about Sadako. She would know that she was a girl who was going into junior high and probably was quite energetic and maybe liked running. But all the dialogue and some of the details, that's created by the author. They've had to sort of fill in the gaps to create a story there. So any question you'd like to be answered about this book, particularly these earlier questions, I'd be really interested to see what things either you're confused about, what you'd like to know more about, and maybe we can answer those in a later chapter. All right, thank you guys. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you next week for lesson 7. Bye-bye.